All right, everyone, welcome back to the God Attachment Healing Podcast. Excited that you're here, as always, trying to bring forward a topic that is related to your Christian walk and is something that can draw you closer to the Lord as you continue on in your journey. And today I have Ashley Glatter, who will be sharing about her story of loss, suffering, and also how that strengthened her faith in the Lord. So I know this is going to be a good topic for us to digest and talk about. And yeah, Ashley, I'm excited that you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
excited to be here.
absolutely. Ashley, usually when I start the podcast, I kind of just give the guest the floor to just introduce themselves, say something about their background, and kind of even sharing about their interest in a topic like this.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So I'm a mom to 4 children, and I have an amazing husband, and I nanny 2 little toddlers part-time, and I also substitute teach part-time. And I love writing in my free time. I have a blog at ashleyglatter.com, and I'm in the process of writing a book right now.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've always had a heart for helping people who've been through the fire.
Hmm. Yeah, and based on what you shared, even through email, I mean, it sounds like you've been through some really, really tough losses, and I can't even imagine again just going through that. And a lot of people, Christians who experience things like that, I mean, in many ways, it can break their faith. And I'm looking forward to hearing you share kind of how where it took you and how how everything happened, and see where you are today.
Yeah, so I think like you had asked me, what has given me a heart to encourage others
Hmm.
in their faith and just through suffering. And so I would say it started when I was 11 years old and my oldest brother, he was 16, he died in the Columbine shooting. And so that kind of began, for one, I really had a heart for siblings because they're known as the forgotten mourners. And a lot of times they can kind of unintentionally be left out of a lot of the support that's given to the parents who have lost a child and everything like that. So I had a heart for siblings. And I think later on in my journey is when I had more of a heart for the faith aspect. My family was strong Christians, and we stayed close to God through my brother's murder.
Mm.
Not that it wasn't challenging and heartbreaking, but it didn't really cause me to question my faith in God, even though I did start to have some skepticism, a little bit of, well, what's kind of the point of praying for safety if, stuff like this happens, or
Mm.
just questions like that. As I grew older, I went to college, I got married at 23, and my husband and I started having kids fairly young. I was 25 with my first baby, a baby girl,
Mm.
Bridget.
Mhm.
And then we had my son, John, and we named him after my brother who was murdered.
Mm.
And then with our third pregnancy, I started having a lot of anxiety during that pregnancy, and I didn't really know why. It was still a little early on in it. And I wrote in my blog that I felt like God was telling me that no matter what the future held, I was going to get through it with his strength, not my own strength.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what that meant at that time, but I felt that weighing on my heart. And not long after that, probably a month or so after that, we went to our 20-week ultrasound, and we found out that my son had uh, a missing left arm, and he had
Mm.
possible stomach and heart issues.
Wow.
So the future was very uncertain and unknown. But of course, we already loved him, and we were going to do whatever we could to fight for him.
Mhm.
So he was born at 38 weeks pregnant. So after tons of ultrasounds and things all along the way, he was born at 38 weeks. And he was born not really breathing well. They had to intubate him right away.
Mhm.
And one of his eyes looked different than the other. But, he went straight to the NICU, and things were stable. But then from that point on, to make like a really long journey shorter,
Mm.
we continued to find out about different health issues that my son had. So he had to have surgery on his intestines. We found out that his one eye looked different, actually didn't have an eyeball behind that
Oh,
eyelid. So
wow.
it was just kind of like a cyst.
Hmm.
And we found out that, he had some kidney issues. And as we progressed in the hospital, we kept finding out more and more. And one of the most devastating things we found out was that his trachea got so tiny to the point of a pen tip. So that's
Mm.
why he wasn't able to breathe as well on his own. And uh, we watched doctors doing CPR. He had basically open heart surgery, but with the trachea. And everything, he kept fighting, he kept going. And after 2.5 months, we actually got to bring him home.
Mm.
And, he had follow-up visits with all these different doctors.
So from
And then
0
after
to
a
two
day
and a
and a
half
half at
months, he
home,
was in the hospital.
yes. Yep. So he was in the NICU and then he got transferred down to the PICU when things got a little bit more serious, I guess you could say. So the pediatric intensive care unit, they could do a little bit more for him. So, yeah, we got him home and he was on a little bit of oxygen. He had a feeding tube, um, but he passed away in his sleep after a day and a half at home.
Oh.
And the doctors and nurses were just kind of surprised, because they had just discharged him and obviously he had a lot of health issues, but, we weren't expecting it.
Hmm.
Um, so I think after that experience, it really caused me to question God a lot more and have a lot more doubts. Um, yeah, and we can go into those questions later on, but
Sure.
and then just to 2 years after my son died, then my other brother, my only other living sibling, was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer.
Mm.
And he fought that for 5.5 years and passed away just a year ago.
Oh, wow, that's
But I will
recent.
say that, yeah.
Mhm.
So I will say though that because of all the wrestling I did with God through Joshua's death, my son, I came into my brother's diagnosis and went with him through that journey in a much different place than if I hadn't gone through my son's death.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even, and again, well, thank you for sharing that, Ashley. I know that's, I mean, the processing, the coping, the support that you received along the way, and even your faith, right? One of the things that kind of holds everything together. One of the unique parts of your story is the Columbine shooting and how your brother was murdered in that. And that was, I mean, that was a national thing. And you said
Yes.
you were 11 at that time?
Mm-hmm.
So you made
Yes.
reference to your parents kind of being very strong believers and, kind of keeping the faith there. Now, from that point till when you lost your son, what changed? Like, what was the biggest difference? Because 11 to 20, you said 25? So,
When I had Joshua, I was 29.
okay, okay, that's right. That's right. So 29. So
Yeah.
that's a long range of, your own growth, own experiences, going through high school, all that, college and everything. What changed? What
Yes.
was that like from 11 to 29?
Yeah. So I think as a teenager and really early into college, I had all of these deep questions. It felt like the more I studied the Bible, the more
Mm.
confused I was. And so I kind of got into apologetics a little bit and listening to
Mm.
different speakers. Ravi Zacharias was one I really enjoyed listening to.
Hmm.
And I remember even having a conversation with one of my youth pastors, who's the one who married my husband and I.
Mm.
But I remember going into that meeting and asking him about God in the Old Testament and just like how he seemed kind of arrogant and cold and
Mm.
so I was struggling with things like that. What is the character and the heart of God, I guess.
Hmm.
But in all that time, I'd say like I still went to church, I still read my Bible, I still joined like on campus ministries. uh I never walked away from my faith, but I think there was always a part of me that didn't fully trust God.
Hmm.
I wasn't, um, yeah, I think I just didn't fully trust him. And I still had all these questions that I felt like I could just never get the answers to. Nothing
Mm.
ever kind of appeased me.
What kind of questions were you
Um,
having?
I think just, like I said, kind of the character of God and why does he allow certain things like this to happen? When my brother died, though, actually, I felt like, why not us? Why shouldn't we experience suffering and loss? Like we're not exempt from any of that. So it wasn't in that regard, but maybe just the will of God and how his
Mm.
sovereignty works and yeah, his character and studying the Old Testament. I think there's just so many questions because we don't have the context a lot of times.
Yeah.
So just asking those types of things. But at the same time, I still knew that he was with me and I knew that I wanted him in my life. I wasn't
Hmm.
a matter of really questioning his promises like eternal life and, where
Hmm.
we go when we die. I didn't question those types of things.
Sure. Yeah. And what about friends that were around you? Because I think sometimes when we have such big losses like this, especially in your case, like friends want to say the right thing or they want to try to be very supportive. Like, were there things that they said that were like not helpful at all, or maybe just added more fuel to the
Absolutely.
fire? Okay. Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
that's a hard part. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and especially as a kid, not many kids my age had been through anything close to that. And so you'd get like, yeah, my dog died. I know how you feel. And,
Oh
it's
man.
like,
Not the same.
not the same.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I think that made me feel kind of set apart from everybody,
Hmm.
just kind of like I didn't fit in. I had this different perspective than a lot of people.
Hmm.
And so that was hard, I think, growing up with that, especially like going into your teen years and everything like that. And then I remember even like in college, if I was having a hard day or the Virginia Tech shooting happened when I was in college. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
each time those shootings or things would come up, it would kind of trigger,
Hmm.
things with my brother. And it's hard for people to get that. Some people would say, well, it's been a long time, and they kind of
Mm.
expect you to move on. Um,
And even more
so
pressure
yeah,
sometimes on believers, right? Like,
yes,
hey, the Lord should have healed that already. Like,
yes,
why is this still coming up for you type thing?
definitely. And I think with my son's death, I felt like Christians really wanted to breeze past, they want to get to like the redemption in the story.
Yeah.
And they just want to tie a ribbon on it and be like, oh, but see, look at all the good that came out of it, or
Ugh,
see
it's
how God
tough.
used it. Yeah. And that really was hard for me then because you feel like
Mm.
people just want to pass over your pain, kind of like Job's friends in the
Yeah.
Bible. It's like
Yeah.
they just kind of want, okay, we'll grieve with you for a little bit, but let's move on now.
Right. Uh,
Um, yeah.
yeah. No, that's one of the biggest frustrations I think that I have oftentimes. I work with a lot of trauma clients, and one of the things that they'll get from friends is that, well, the Lord should have healed that part of you already, or you've had, it's been a long time, or whatever the case is. But, I always remind them that, God made us emotional, mental, physical, spiritual beings. And the physical, I mean, it's a way to keep us safe, to protect us, and we become aware of these things and so on. And it's just so hard when I hear stories like this because I know a big part of this, at least even from the research, what helps people oftentimes through these type of events is having strong social support. It sounds like your family was that for you when you were younger. And who was that for you when when you lost your son? Did you have supportive friends and family and other people that were there?
Yeah, I feel extremely lucky because one of my kind of acquaintances introduced me to one of her friends who had just lost her baby.
Okay.
He lived for 5 days and she had spent months in the hospital, like trying to get him to, a point in the pregnancy where he would be okay if he lived, but he ultimately didn't end up living. We
Mm.
both shared a faith and we we just like clung to each other because we could go through, all these different emotions together. We could ask the really raw
Mm,
questions to each other that you just can't ask someone, someone else who
hmm.
hasn't been through it. So that was really huge for me. And
Okay.
then we also were a part of an infant loss organization called Walk With Me,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's just in Colorado, but they are amazing.
Hmm.
So I think that can be really helpful, if people don't have a lot of family support, just to even find one other person somehow that has
Hmm.
been through, something similar can be really helpful, or even support groups. We didn't do too much of that, but some people really, enjoy that and find a lot from it.
Yeah, yeah. And Ashley, you mentioned that, your heart towards God didn't shift that as much, like you had questions and you were walking through, but still trusted him in the process. I imagine that maybe with some people, with other believers, maybe was there any type of different feelings towards them, like not knowing how to respond or what to say or what to do? So sometimes we have a secure attachment with God, but then with other people, it's like, I'm kind of frustrated right now, and you're not really helping this process, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think, yeah, sometimes people just don't know what to say, and
Yeah.
and that's okay. Or sometimes they just don't say anything at all, and then you feel kind of
Mm,
forgotten. And I think that's what I struggled with most, losing my first brother, is not feeling seen or kind of recognized in my grief a lot.
hmm.
Um, and so like losing my son, I felt more seen, but then also I was having all this wrestling with God with that. And so how other Christians respond to that too, that can make them really uncomfortable
That's true.
if
Yeah.
you're questioning God or have doubts, or anything like that. So that could be a little bit awkward too, which why is
Mm,
why it was great when I had that one close friend that we could kind of wrestle with our faith, and wouldn't judge each other, but we
hmm.
just take it and be like, yeah, I've wondered that too. But we knew we still wanted a relationship with God, but it wasn't threatening to us to tell each other those things. Whereas other people, I think they feel like they need to defend God.
Hmm. Right, right. That's so true. It's almost a lose-lose, right? Either you're not coping well enough, or it's too fast, or
Yeah,
there's I can sense the mixed emotions around all of that. And I'm
yeah,
sure it
for
was really
sure.
helpful to have someone along the same journey. Were there questions that they had that kind of caught you by surprise, where, as they were sharing their story, that you're like, oh, I didn't think about that, or just something that resonated with you more from that friend?
I think in our journeys, we did kind of go a little bit separate ways for a time,
Mm,
where I I knew, I we both agreed like we God didn't want those things to happen, but
hmm.
he allowed them, you
Hmm.
know. Um, Whereas I think sometimes she went down a little bit of a different path. Like she really pulled apart her entire faith and
Mm,
was kind of questioning everything she thought she knew,
okay, yeah.
about God, about Christianity. And I wasn't quite there. Like I had the wrestling questions, but I still went back to, all the basics of the faith.
Hmm.
Um, but I think just being there for each other, and I feel like she's come a long way in her journey with God again, but I think for a time she almost disconnected a bit,
Mm,
Um, but she did keep going. And I think because she had people in her life that she could talk to about these things. And, I think she got a spiritual advisor and things like that, like just
mm.
helping her go through all the questions and doubt that she had.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's so important. And as we're talking about that, um, your husband comes to mind, because obviously him knowing maybe your background of what you grew up with and how you guys got together, and then you guys lose a son together. What was that like? Because you guys are both going through the fire together, and not all the times are we feeling the same way. It's
Yes.
it can be very mixed, or one maybe is stronger that moment than the other. So, yeah, can you share a little bit about what that was like? Just whatever you feel comfortable with, Jern.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and that's something I talked with my friend, her name's Heidi. We would talk about that because men grieve very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And um, even if it's, we might cry more or express our grief more, talk about our children more. And men, and I don't want to speak for all men, but, a lot of times it's harder for them to kind of put their grief into words or,
Yeah.
whatnot. They can kind of go inside of themselves more, I think.
Mhm.
So
They
that
feel they
can be
need to be
kind
the
of hard.
strong one too.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I definitely felt that. And I felt like, no, I just want you to be here with me in this,
Yeah.
like I wanted to see, and this could sound bad, but I wanted to see like his pain and I wanted
Hmm.
to know I wasn't alone in it. And I didn't want him to feel like had to be the strong one. But
Hmm.
you're right. I think a lot of men feel like that they need to be the rock.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was interesting too with my husband's faith journey because I feel like he was set on fire for God through it.
Mm.
I mean, he would like send me scriptures, text them to me. And he was all of a sudden listening to like all these preachers on his drive to work. And it was
Mm.
actually really amazing to see that. And I know I have friends whose husbands went the other direction, and they were
Mm.
mad at God. So it's just interesting how different people cope and deal with that. But you're right, some days, I could be having a hard day and he wasn't, or he's having a hard day. And sometimes that can be helpful because you can kind of support each other and lift each
Hmm.
other up in that way.
Yeah, yeah. And how is that something that you share with your other kids? Because that's another layer to this as well, right? That like really
Yes.
what we're doing when we're grieving the loss, we're modeling for others kind of what that looks like, right? Where it's okay for me to share how I'm feeling. It's okay for me to show how I'm feeling, and also to have some doubts, but also come to this resolution that I still trust God, and He's going to comfort me throughout this time. How do you share that, pass that on to your kids because they're seeing you, and even maybe as a mom, also
Yeah.
needing to feel strong for them too.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was one of the most heartbreaking things is having to tell, our daughter that her baby brother had died. But I also think she was 4 at the time, and my other son was almost 2. So he didn't really understand as much, but my
Mm,
daughter definitely understood. And I think maybe part of the reason she did understand is because I had shared with her already about my brother.
mm,
And, I never wanted death to be something that we don't talk about, or gets uncomfortable because death is a part of life. It's a part of
hmm.
our journeys, and so I had shared with her already about, my brother in heaven and obviously age appropriate,
Sure.
talking
Mhm.
about it. But yeah, I think kind of guiding them through their grief too is just letting them lead the way a little bit is what we
Mm,
did is like if they want to talk about him, they, we'll talk about him. If they don't, that's okay. And there were definitely times though that, I'd want to go put on a movie for them and then I'd go in my room and have some time to just cry or grieve. So
mm,
I wasn't shy about crying in front of them, but it wasn't also something I wanted to always be doing, around
mm.
them either.
Yeah, yeah. Did you struggle with it? Like, not wanting to cry around them and or even knowing what to exactly say? Like what was that process like as well? Like what do I
Yeah.
say with them? Like what were some words that you shared with her?
Yeah. I think sometimes if, something came up, I'd just be like, I'm just really missing him right now, or I'm thinking
Mm,
about him. And I think she understood, but I think it's also just uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for kids to see their parents and crying or
yeah.
distressed, but I think it is good for them to see that sometimes,
Mm,
maybe not all the time, but I
hmm.
think it's good that they can see that like it's okay. It's okay to cry. Like we don't need to hide that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's interesting too because they were so young. We've had a lot of conversations as they've gotten older. One of my friends, she also lost a child. Her daughter
Mm-hmm.
was 2 years old, and she had put her kids in counseling. And one something the counselor said that really stayed with me
Mm-hmm.
was that as kids grow and go through these different stages of their development, they
Mm-hmm.
kind of start to look back on the death of their brother or sister and like see it in a new way, in like a new light. And they almost have to like reinvestigate that each time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that's so interesting because I kind of did that with my brother in a sense. Like, as you're a teenager, you're thinking some things. And then when you're in college, you might be
Yeah.
seeing it in a whole new way and
Mm-hmm.
investigating different things about it. And so I just thought, oh, that's so true. So as time's gone on, with my daughter and my son, they would ask new questions, or even now they'll ask questions. And it's been, that was 2017. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
they'll ask questions like, how did he die again? Or
Mm-hmm.
what happens? And it's just interesting because, we've talked about it over and
Mm-hmm.
over, but it's like they're reprocessing that in their brain,
Yeah.
and trying to make sense of it in a new way.
Yeah. And even for the younger siblings too, right? Like at some point,
Yeah, so I had a baby after Joshua died.
mm-hmm.
So our youngest child never knew his older brother. But yeah,
Mm,
my other son he just turned 2 like not long after he died.
mm-hmm.
So he didn't really have memories of Joshua, but even as he grew, he would say things like, I wish he was here, I
Mm,
miss him.
mm-hmm.
So they're still processing it and still dealing with some of those emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, was there a noticeable difference between, um, I mean, you were living with your brother, and then in college with or after college with your baby, right? And then with your recent
Hmm.
loss of your brother, was there any different? Did you cope kind of the same way? Were you doing things differently? Like I'm guessing that there was something new in each grieving stage, but I don't know. Like, what was that like for you for the most recent loss of your brother?
Yeah, I think that was such a different thing too, because my brother lived for 5.5 years with colon cancer.
Was that not Is it not common for it to last that long? Does it usually happen a
Um,
lot faster?
so he had stage 4 when he was diagnosed. So yeah,
Mm.
you can die pretty quickly.
Hmm.
It was only a 13% 5-year survival rate for
Oh, wow.
someone diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So
Wow.
yeah, he lived a long time with it. And I'd say the last couple years he had it, um, it was really painful just to see his body,
Mm.
deteriorating. And I think it adds a whole nother layer. My first brother died instantly, pretty much,
Hmm.
and he didn't have to suffer. And,
Mm.
we did watch my son suffer, and we had to watch my other brother suffer. And I think that does just add a different layer to the
That's
grief.
true.
And
Mm.
yeah, and you are, you know, kind of like with my brother, I was definitely grieving his death before he even died. And I think that was different than the other 2 losses that I had had. Um, but as far as like my faith, I feel like that's where the biggest difference was because
Mm.
with Joshua, I was asking all these questions and like wrestling. And at the end, kind of that wrestling, I realized that I'm just not always going to get the answers to my questions. And
Mm.
I'm not, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Mhm.
I'm not going to get the answers to my questions. And sometimes we don't know why certain things happen,
Yeah.
and that's just how it is. And my comfort was that in the end, when we see Jesus face to face and we're in heaven, like
Mm.
it's gonna make sense. I don't know how,
Yeah.
but it's gonna make sense and
Hmm.
all is gonna be made right. And that's what I hung my hope on.
Mm.
And so when my brother went through all of that, I didn't really ask why. It was like, I don't know. We might never know the answer, and we might not see all tons of good stuff come from it. Now, I
Hmm.
will argue that you can always see some good in every situation, but that was the other hard contrast is when I lost my brother at Columbine, we saw so much good come from it. We
Mm.
saw so many people giving their lives to Christ and sending us letters and saying, I was a lukewarm Christian and I'm not going to be that anymore.
Wow.
Um, it was amazing.
Hmm.
And then, with my son's death, it felt like, okay, God, like, what was the purpose of all that suffering? You
Right,
know,
right.
I just saw my baby suffer and go through all these horrible things for months, and then he just dies. Like,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
like I wanted to see something good come out of that.
Sure.
And I think we all do, when we go through any type of suffering. But that was really hard for me
Hmm.
because at least like you want to see, okay, it wasn't in vain. We got some purpose out of the pain. Um, and I had to really go back into like all of my memories in the hospital and all of that with Joshua and just see the good and see the evidence that God was there even when I didn't feel him.
Mm.
And so I think after all of that, going into my other brother with cancer,
Hmm.
I wasn't I wasn't like, okay, what's all, I'm going to add up all the good things that came out of this. Like, I just kind of had more of an acceptance and a surrender. Like, we don't know why he got colon cancer at 35, and we might not see all the fruit that comes, that happened because of this, but I think we will see those things in heaven. Um, and my brother too, he had such a great attitude through all of it. Like he wasn't mad at God. He didn't ask God why. Like
Mm.
he was amazing. And so I think yeah, I just came into that process just with more of a surrendered spirit and
Hmm.
my hope being in heaven and in, Christ's promise to be with us and
Yeah.
to give us eternal life and all will be made right.
Mm.
And, we can't hang anything really on this life and in
Yeah.
this earth.
Hmm.
Like one of the questions you asked me was, did I ever feel like abandoning my faith? And I think, there was a time when Josh was still in the hospital where I felt like, what are you doing, God? I don't get
Right.
it, you
Yeah.
know? But where else do you find hope? Like,
Hmm.
there's no hope in this life. I mean, you can't put your hope in people either because we're all going to let each other down.
It's true.
So, uh, yeah, there was no hope I could find in this life
Mm.
and and what was around me, and I had to, put all my hope in God and Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Ashley, you'll appreciate this because I've talked about this before. I call it the Peter moments, and that basically what you shared right there, that's a Peter moment in that when Jesus was doing all the miracles and people were following him, and he had all these disciples that were supposed to be following him, and then they got to a point where okay, I'm not doing any more miracles anymore, and they left. And then Jesus turns over to his disciples and he says, "Will you leave me too?" And Peter goes, "Lord, where do we go? You have the words of eternal life, right?" And
Yes.
I think that's the realization that I think us as believers we get to. It's like as much as I could look out outside of this situation that I'm in, what do I turn to alleviate the pain, right? Because that's usually the response is I want to alleviate the pain. And some people will abandon their faith. Some people will take on vices. Some people will live a life of sin, and then they come back later. But I
Mhm.
think there's also this other aspect of, as believers, we realize that all of that just leads to more emptiness or more sadness or more problems. And,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if that's kind of what the experience was like, where it's like, yeah, Lord, I mean, I'm frustrated. I don't know what you're doing here, but you're the only hope I have. So I'm going to keep trusting in you.
Yes.
Mm.
Exactly. I love that. Like the Peter moment. I think that's really great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I felt that exactly. It's like, where else do you turn? You
Yeah.
know?
Mm.
So,
Yeah. Well, I know that, and now looking back, I guess this is where you can fill me in on that. Is there still pain? Is there still pain from each of those experiences that comes up for you every once in a while? Or has it been more, can you regulate it more when it comes up? It's like, Lord, it was a lesson, or it was, here's how I felt about that. Like, is there still pain from the past?
Uh, yeah, I think definitely. And I think there's things that can trigger that more, you know. But I
Mm,
think especially losing this last loss, losing my brother, it can bring up those other losses. And
hmm
then, thinking of him in heaven with my other brother and with my son, it's like, yeah, it kind of makes all those other losses come to the surface a little bit more. So
hmm
I think there's definitely pain. And I don't think you ever necessarily get over your grief,
mm,
but you learn, to live with it. And time does help. Like
okay.
I kind of hate when people say it never gets easier. I hate when people say that
Mm,
because it absolutely does get easier.
hmm
But I do think like having faith in God
Yeah.
is what heals you. Time doesn't heal you because we've talked to people that have lost a child and it'll be 20 years later and they feel like they're still kind of stuck, in the
hmm
same place. So I think, Jesus heals you and having that hope and God heals you, but time does help,
hmm
and
And why do
it
you think
does.
that, Ashley? Why do you think that they're stuck there? What do you attribute to that?
I think when you don't have any idea what happens to someone when they die, like if you
Mm,
I've volunteered at a grief camp for kids.
hmm
It was called Camp Aaron. And you couldn't really talk about your faith there, which was really hard for me.
hmm
But a lot of the people were like, yeah, I don't know where they are. I don't know. I don't know what happened to them. And to me,
Mm,
that would be so hard to like keep moving forward, knowing like,
yeah.
I don't know where they are. I might never see them again. Like
Mm,
that, that's horrible to me. I don't know how you
yeah.
could move on, really.
Mm,
So for me, knowing like, no, I know where they are. I know I'm going to see them again. That's huge. And I think
yeah.
that can make all the difference. The Bible even says that if you're a believer, you grieve differently than the world grieves.
Absolutely. And that's a great point too, because yeah, we do have that expectation that we will see other believers, people that we love as well, that we'll see them in heaven, right? Um, with all of this
Yeah.
that you've experienced, and I'm sure, have encountered other people who have lost or have been through a season of suffering. From these experiences, you take away some promises that you clung to throughout the way. And how do you show up for people who are going through a painful, maybe not just losses itself, but also just suffering in general? Like, how do you show up for them? I know you have a heart for being an encouragement to other believers when they're going through something difficult and strong suffering like this. Yeah, how do you show up for them? Like, what's your mode and approach to ministering to them?
Yeah. I think a really practical thing, and you've probably heard this from other people, but don't ask someone like, or say, let us know if you need anything.
Mm,
They're not going to let you know.
right. That's a great
So,
point. That's true.
and
Mm.
you know what? I have had a little bit of that where people ask me and I'll give them something and then sometimes it doesn't happen, which is
Oh,
fine. But
right, right.
it's kind of like if
Mm.
you say that, like you gotta mean it.
Yeah,
And most likely people won't reach out because they don't want to be a burden.
sure.
So, I would say to people like just do something. Like even if it's just write a card and give
Mm,
it to them. Say, I'm thinking about you. Write a text like that. That's so easy to do now. It takes seconds.
hmm
Just text them and say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. I'm praying for you. And don't expect a response back. And I kind of learned that a little bit when someone who had been in my Bible study also lost her child. And I was thinking, like, oh, she's going to want to, like, connect with me. And hopefully I can be an encouragement to her and I wouldn't always get a lot back, like if I'd send a text or something and I just had to be like, you know what, it's not about me and just
mm,
like send a text or a card or encouragement and if she gets back to me she does like
hmm
but if she doesn't, that's okay too,
Yeah.
um so yeah, I'd say like give without expecting anything in return, and drop off a meal, or say like, is there a night this week that I could drop a meal off? Just you're being courteous, but you're not putting all of it in their hands.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think for people who aren't believers, you don't have to beat them with with
Hmm.
the gospel or anything, but just saying I'm praying for you. There's a I volunteer with that infant loss organization that I told you about, Walk With Me, and I've been speaking with a woman who lost her baby, and she's not a believer.
Mm.
And so I just try to, tell her I'm praying for you. And like if she ever wants to talk about faith or anything like that, I'm here for her. But just trying to relate to her, you know, as just two grieving mothers.
Hmm.
Um, and also, again, something a lot of people say is just listening and not, please don't give any Christian platitudes.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I once had someone ask me, like, well, God does everything for a reason. So, what was the reason for your son dying?
In that
And I was
moment?
just, yeah,
Oh my
it was
gosh.
like after maybe like a month or two after.
Oh,
And I just said, I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
oh no.
But,
Oh
it was
man.
just stuff like that. It's like, no, no, no. Don't bring up stuff like that.
And
And
actually, are these people that are like close to you? Like, are they people that you knew for a long time or?
I mean, I'd say she's more of an acquaintance, but I did know
Okay.
her for a while.
Okay.
Not a close friend or anything.
Do you feel
But
like
I
closer
think
friends respond better or differently than maybe those who are like in the middle?
um possibly, yeah. Yeah, I'd say like overall probably
Okay.
closer friends respond better. But I think it also kind of just depends. I think as a kid, like going through my first brother's death, I didn't have as much tolerance for the dumb things people would say.
Right. Right.
Um, I mean, I know my mom, she said someone after my brother died said, "Oh, what are you going to do with that room now?"
What? Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And she's just
Oh,
like, "Oh
yeah.
my God."
Ah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. But like I think as I grew older, maybe got a little more mature, maybe a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of just tried to see things as like they're trying to relate, you know,
Hmm.
they're they're trying to bring some sort of comfort, and I kind of gave people a little more grace that,
Hmm.
it's hard to say something to a grieving person,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I get that. We can be really moody, raw, like it can be hard to say anything, right? So
Hmm.
I think when people choose to say something and to reach out, like automatically, I think that takes some courage, and, you know, give them a little bit of grace, even if they don't say the right things, or even if they say something kind of offensive, just kind of
Hmm.
thinking they just don't understand. I
Yeah.
think giving them that grace, because a lot of people just don't understand. And so, yeah,
Yeah. No, I think that's good because I think it can also be very easy to develop very strong, maybe negative feelings towards not just that person, but others who do the same thing. But I think, yeah, that element of if I'm just gracious and just understand they're trying to connect in some way, maybe that alleviates some
yeah.
of that negative feeling towards them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think even like, I talked about the dog thing, like, oh, I lost my dog. I can
Mm.
relate to you. My friend and I talked about that a little bit of, for someone in their life, that might have been like the top pain scale for them. And
Mm.
so they're trying to relate like the worst thing that's happened to them to like the worst thing that happened to you, you
Yeah,
know?
that's
So
true.
kind of
Mm.
giving them that grace too of like, that was really painful for them, and they're just trying to relate.
Hmm.
Um, but on the same token, I think I've even had to like train myself when relating to other people, not to mention my own losses, when
Mm.
talking to someone else. So it can just be easy to be like, I know. I kind of understand what you're going through. I lost my brother or my son or whatever, but really just like listening to them and
Yeah.
letting them talk and not bringing myself into it as much unless they want to know, different things and relating experiences. But
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair. And yeah, those are really good practical tips of learning how to be there for people who are suffering, going through a difficult time. Um, Actually, you mentioned a couple of promises that you clung to throughout this process, or maybe they're takeaways after the fact.
yeah.
And I know one that really stuck with me because it's such a strong one that I cling to as well is how we'll see our saved loved ones when we go to heaven, and that gives us
Mhm.
hope that we will see him and we'll see Jesus and he's going to be there for us and he's going to explain and we're going to understand everything at that point. But are there other promises that you cling to or that you learned throughout this whole process, these events?
Yeah, I think the biggest promise that I clung to. So when my son Joshua was born, I took out my Bible and started reading the book of Joshua, and I wanted to find a verse
Mm,
that I could cling to during that time. And I came across it very early on, Joshua 1:9. Do
hmm
not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And
hmm
that was Josh's verse. And like our
mm,
kids memorized it. And truly through that process, through his life and through his death, I realized the greatest promise God has for us is to be with us. That is one of the
hmm
greatest promises that we have. It's not to heal us or give us a miracle. Um,
mm,
it's not for health, wellness, and prosperity, but it's
yeah.
to be with us in his presence. And that's ultimately what we get in heaven too. We get him, which
Mm,
is so amazing.
hmm
And so, yeah, I'd say that is one of the biggest things I clung to. And also my brother who died of cancer, his verse that is actually on his gravestone, and I absolutely loved it, is Second
mm.
Corinthians 4:16 through 18,
Oh,
which
I love that
says,
one. Yeah.
yes, do
Yes.
not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And I think
Mm,
that just encapsulates everything, is
hmm
like, don't put your hope in this world.
Yeah.
It's in the next life. So,
hmm Amen. No, I appreciate that, Ashley. That was really encouraging. Thank you for sharing your story. One of the things I always like to ask as well is there anything that we missed? Anything that you feel, um, this was something that I wish the audience can take away from this conversation today? What's a takeaway or two that you would give to listeners about your experience or just what the Lord taught you throughout this time, now as you're reflecting back?
yeah, I think a big thing is we won't always have the answers to our questions, and we might not even see the good that's come out of something horrible. But I encourage people to keep wrestling with God, keep seeking answers, even if, they're questions that you might not get the answers to, but to just keep persevering. So my
Mm.
son, Joshua, he only had one arm. And I don't know if you know the story of Finding Nemo, but
Mm.
it's a kid's movie, and he's a little clownfish that only has one good fin. And the
Oh
whole
yeah.
theme,
That's
the
funny.
whole theme through the whole movie is just keep swimming, just keep swimming.
hmm
And so that's what I really encourage everybody to do is just keep swimming, just keep seeking God, keep moving forward.
Mm.
Sometimes it's, really small steps that you're taking, but just keep going.
Yeah.
And also another thing is even when you can't feel God, trust that He is there.
Mm.
And there were times, especially throughout my son's life, that I felt like, God, just give me peace. I just prayed for peace, and it wouldn't come,
Mm.
and I wouldn't feel like I felt him.
hmm
But then one thing that time helps with is it can kind of help you to get some perspective and to look back and to dig through those memories and dig through the trauma and the heartache and see that, oh yeah, God sent me that person to bring me that meal that day. Or, you know, I saw my little boy smile. That was such a gem in that awful time. You start to realize the beauty and the good
Mm-hmm.
that is in those situations that maybe you couldn't see before because you were just so overwhelmed with pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, just encouraging people that you might not always feel God and you might not always feel that peace, but he is there. Try to
Mm-hmm.
look for him.
Those are super helpful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Ashley, at the beginning, you shared that you were writing a book, and just wanted to kind of,
Yeah.
if you want to share a little bit about that and release it, or just the theme or topic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't have um I have a working title, and my working
Mm-hmm.
title is To Wrestle and to Embrace.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about just wrestling with God and learning to finally just embrace him and surrender to him and his will and finally have peace throughout it. Um, so yeah, it talks about my journey and then just my faith journey as I wrestled with God through that.
Okay. Yeah, great. Well, feel free to reach out and let me know about it. I could put it up on the
Yeah.
podcast notes and add it to the page. And again, Ashley, thank you for sharing your story. I know it's going to be an encouragement to a lot of people, because I mean, there's so many questions that Christians have, and there's a lot of questions around loss. And I think your story is an encouraging one, because it's a reminder of not always knowing or having the answers, but trusting in God's character and who He is. And I think today the message has been that God will remove those things immediately. Either it's an immediate relief, or it's, I need to leave this because I didn't get what the relief that I was looking for. And I think your story,
Mm.
just the idea of continuing to trust in God's character, is really kind of where we want to land. Yeah, I just thank you for sharing, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
It's been great
absolutely.
talking to you.
Likewise, likewise. All right, guys. Well, I will see you guys next time, and with another topic, and we'll see you then.